Psalm 37, 1-9. Do not fret because of those who are evil, or be envious of those who do wrong. For like the grass, they will soon wither. Like green plants, they will soon die away. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. Be still before the Lord, and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. Refrain from anger, and turn from wrath. Do not fret, it only leads to evil. For those who are evil will be destroyed, but those whose hope is in the Lord, or whose hope is the Lord, will inherit the land. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Last week I told those that were here that I was about to embark upon a 7-part sermon series. And I shared that the series was titled The Fellowship of the Believers. And then I corrected myself and said, no, that's not right. It's the fellowship of the believers. That's what we're going to be working with. And it begins today and will run for 7 weeks through October 24th, Lord willing. As long as he and I stay on the same page, that's what we'll be doing. So I want to begin by saying that leadership is important. We all respect and honor and believe in leadership. I think, though, that there's a problem in that it has become an obsession. It just seems like, I don't have statistics on this, this is anecdotal, but it seems like about half of the conferences for pastors these days, really for the last decade or so, have to do with leadership. About what it means to be a leader, being a good leader, and being a servant leader, and all of those kinds of issues. And what also happens is that returns to the church, and you hear the need for leadership and finding leaders, and it just on and on and on about leadership. And leadership is important. I'm not saying it's not. However, I think that we need to focus more on our fellowship. I think, that to maybe even to just balance that high pendulum swing toward talking and focusing on leadership, we need to kind of go the other way so that we can eventually find the right middle. So that's what we're going to do, is talk about fellowship. Now, the truth is, we're all followers. Even if you're a leader, you're a follower. The question is always, who is it or what is it that you're following? Because you're following something. There's something out there that's influencing you and helping you to do what you need to do in some form or another. And so we're going to start the series with 2 weeks of looking at who or what not to follow. If we're following something, we want to make sure we're not following the wrong thing or the wrong one. And so that's where we begin. And we begin, disclaimer, we can't cover it all. So in these 7 weeks, in the next 2 weeks, today and next week, we're not going to cover everything that you should not follow. And in the next several weeks, we're not going to cover everything that you should follow. Although there's something built into that that kind of sums up the rest. And so we kind of can when it comes to the what to follow, but not so much on the what not to follow or who not to follow, because we can't just cover it all. So we're going to begin with what I'm calling a sermon pre-story. It's a Bible story that I want to kind of talk about before I get into my main text. And the story goes back to that time during Israel's history when they have been conquered by the Babylonians, and the Babylonians have taken all the best people of the land and hauled them back to Babylon. And they're going to serve them, and they put them to work, and so they're exiled to this foreign land. And during that time, some of those that have been hauled into Babylon proved to be top-notch. And they end up getting put in places of leadership because of their abilities and skills. And you're familiar, I'm sure, with the story of Daniel and the lion's den. This is that time period. Daniel's one of those guys that was hauled off to Babylon, proves himself, and then has this issue with the paganism and everything, and winds up getting tossed into the fire, or tossed into the den of lions. And of course, he's rescued from that. And then at the same time, three of his companions, three of his friends, who end up being renamed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they too rise to positions of power. And they too become leaders. Leadership's important. But then some people get jealous and angry with them, and so they convince the king, Nebuchadnezzar, to build a great big statue of himself and have all of the people worship that statue and bow down to it whenever they're called upon by the king. Has the music play, and when that music plays, you have to bow down and worship him. And so what happens is the big statue is created, 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide, gold. It's massive and valuable. And the time comes when all the music plays, and all the people bow down to it, except those three guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They stand there on their own. And so this gets reported to the king, and he's mad. He calls them in, tells them again, you know all the rules, you got to do this. I'm gonna let you off if the next time the music sounds, you will bow down and worship like everybody else. And so it happens again, and they don't do it. And so I want to turn to their response when the king calls them in again and talks to them. It's found in the book of Daniel, chapter 3, verses 16 to 18. So I am going to go ahead and read that now. This has always been one of my favorite Old Testament paragraphs. Because he threatens them that he's going to throw them in the fiery furnace, and he asks them the question, what God will rescue you from my hand? And so this is their reply. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. And I always love that. Our God can rescue us, but even if he doesn't, we're not going to do it. And so I heard one preacher telling this story, and before he got too far into it, he asked the question, how many people can you name that bowed down that day? Not a single person. But we can name the three that didn't. They're the ones who went down in history. They're the ones who were different from everybody else. And they're the ones that ultimately became part of the story. If you want to know the rest of the story, you're going to have to read it, because I'm not going to talk about it today. So if you wonder what happened to them and don't know already, read the rest of Daniel 3. What I want to do is go to Exodus chapter 23. We're going to read verse 2 now, and then we're going to read another verse later. But let's start with Exodus chapter 23, verse 2. They are being given a series of rules and laws and commands from God, and this is part of that passage. Exodus chapter 23, verse 2. Do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. and I'm just going to stop there. He goes on and he puts it in the context of being a witness in a lawsuit and that sort of thing. But the part I want us to focus on is the idea of do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. Back when Chelsea was a teenager Chelsea's wall had a poster on it that read, "What's popular is not always right, and what's right is not always popular." And I always loved that, and the gist of it has stayed with me. I actually had to contact her and ask her for the exact wording this week, and she remembered it. And then I thought about it, and I thought, you know, if I were writing that, or if I had written that, I would have changed a couple words. It would have said the popular is rarely right, and what is right is rarely popular. I think that shift has taken place where, you know, the majority has shifted the other way. Rarely right to follow the crowd. It just doesn't happen very often that the crowd is doing the right thing. And so I want to next talk about the idea of the crowd. It actually translates a Hebrew word that is translated a lot of different ways. And those ways include, you know, the many, the much, the numerous, the abundant, enough, the multitude. And so all of those ways come up, and in context kind of shifts which one of those words you use. But you can see that they all tie kind of together with the same meaning. But then there's another little class of meaning that this word is also used to translate sometimes. And by the way, Hebrew had a much more, or a much less size vocabulary than Greek or English, for example. And so a lot of their words did double duty. But it was the same word that was sometimes used to describe the rich and the powerful. And so the crowd is also the rich, the powerful. And so I think that, especially using the terminology that we like to use in our country very currently today even, we can think about the crowd as being the influencers. The people from a variety of places that influence people to do things, and they influence what people are doing. And there are even people who, you know, used to on the news, if they were interviewing somebody, they would say this person is, you know, a senator, this person is a baseball player, and they would always give the credits to the person. I've actually seen people being interviewed, and their credit is they're an influencer. I find that a little bit amusing. So I want to think about who are these influencers in our culture. And I think we can start by saying our peers. You know, those that we work with, those that, you know, those that are around us, those that we socialize with. They influence us. If they're all doing something, you know, hey, I ought to do that too. And, you know, as a parent, or thinking back to when I was a child, you know, I wish I had a nickel for every time I said, but they're doing it. Mom, Dad, can I do that? John and Dale are doing it. Jeff is doing it. A different Jeff. You're not the only one. But you know, they have influence in our lives. You know, we want to fit in. We want to be like our peers. And then there are politicians. They're certainly influencers. You know, coming out of you know, last year's campaign, what the politicians say, most people kind of flock to one or the other, and then they kind of get in line and they say what he says, and they want what she says, and you know, they influence us, our political leaders, the mass media. They're certainly influencers. What they report, people listen to, and you know, and of course in our country, the mass media even has sub-medias. So some people are listening to this side of the mass media, other people listening to this other side of the mass media, but it impacts our lives what they say. Social media, you know, Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all those things, they all influence us. In fact, when I talk about those people having credits on the screen, this is an influencer. most of the time that means that they have a blog, or that they have a Facebook page, or that they have a Twitter account, and what they say people listen to. And they can talk about style, and I kind of, back to the mass media, that would include like television programming besides the news. And so some of the things that, is portrayed on television influences our society. There are things that are normalized in our country that 20 years ago they wouldn't even put on TV. And now it's on TV so much, it really seems normal. It used to be like when I was a teenager, young adult, it was rare for unmarried couples to be having sex, and if they were ashamed of it, and they tried to keep it a secret. And we have shifted to the point where when you watch television shows and the media and you think, those who aren't sleeping around are the ones that are considered rare and kind of odd, and sometimes somebody was very gracious and say, "Oh, it's okay that you're not sleeping around. That's your choice." And that's supposed to be graciousness to that person. So there's been a kind of a flip-flop. And, I'm not a fanatic that says everything you see on TV you're going to have to do. I don't think the Three Stooges makes us want to hit each other in the head with hammers. But it does have influence over time, and it changes our culture. Big money, big oil, big tobacco, these places, the advertising dollars, the lobbying money, they too have influence over us. And they do things and try to normalize things. Tell us to, look out for numero uno, all of that. Celebrities. And if you don't think celebrities have influence, research how much celebrities make on endorsements. They are paid big money to endorse a product because we know that they have influence and people will buy that product. And that's always been a mystery to me. Like I could admire a baseball player and think that he's an awesome baseball player, but why on earth would I care what's his favorite coffee? Why would I think that his favorite coffee is going to have to be the best coffee because he's a great baseball player? But that's the way the world works, and those people wield influence over us. Well, I want to ask a question. How did these influencers get to their places of influence? How did some of these people rise? How did these politicians get up there? How did these celebrities become celebrities? And all of those kinds of things. And unfortunately, I honestly think that most of the time it is through lifestyles that are permeated with anti-Christian values. Now, disclaimer, not always. I know there are some good guy celebrities out there. There's probably, count them on your fingers, politicians out there who are good guys. But by and large, they get to where they got by embracing anti-Christian values. Let's look at some, so you know what I'm talking about. For example, self-centeredness. They have this idea that I need to do what's best for me. I need to make choices that improve my lot. I need to care more about how this impacts me than anybody else. I used to love it. That former senator who before being a senator was a stand-up comedian and a Saturday Night Live guy. What was his name?
Al Franken.
Al Franken. Al Franken used to do a comedy sketch where he would come on and share some news. In the economy this week, joblessness is down, 3%. And what I'm sure you're all asking at home is, how is this going to affect me, Al Franken? So I'll tell you what you need to do. We need everybody listening to take $1, put an envelope, mark it to Al Franken, care of CBS Studios or whatever. And so he did this comedy sketch where he openly talked about the important thing is how this affects me. And I thought, that was supposed to be comedy, but too often it's too real. Politicians are making decisions not based on what's best, but based on how is this going to affect voting next year. I'm going to decide things and do things and vote no to stuff and yes to stuff based on how it's going to impact my campaign next year, more than on how it's going to impact the people I serve. They just have that self-centeredness. And then there are those who just greed. What can they do to gain the most? That's how decisions are made, and they normalize that. And we even have nationally known preachers who do that. And they will preach the idea that that is what God wants for me. And you too. If you have as much faith as I have, you can get rich like me. When God blesses you like this, and I'm going to fly my private jet to Atlanta and tell them the same thing next Sunday. That's going on in America too, that greed. Prideful ambition. We believe in ambition. We think people ought to be ambitious and strive to better themselves and accomplish things. But the Bible oftentimes puts together this phrase, prideful ambition. And that is where the motive is not right. And that is where the goal is not quite in the right place. It's ambitious for the wrong reasons. I want to keep up with the Joneses and that sort of thing. Lying. Believe it or not, a lot of the people who are our influencers, they got there by lying a lot. And they stay there by lying a lot. We just have to remember that and think about that. Being exploitative. These are the people, in the book of James, they're being told not to be partial to rich people. And James tells them, don't be partial to them. Aren't they the ones who exploit you to get their riches? They're getting their riches on your backs. They exploit you, and that's how they get to the top. Most of us have played the game of Monopoly, right? The winner is the one who puts everybody else into bankruptcy. And where does that money go? Not to the bank. You land on their hotel and you got to pay them all your money, and they make all their money. The winner makes all of his money by exploiting everybody else in the game. We believe in the idea of win-win. This is a deal that's good for me and good for you. In Monopoly, that never happens. It's all about being good for me, and it's all about how I can put you out and take you out. I had an uncle when I was a kid, 8 years old, he's 16. He would have us play Monopoly with him. And because he enjoyed that, he changed the rules. The rules say that there's no personal debt. You either pay up or you're out, kind of a thing. And my uncle would say, oh, no, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Get out a piece of paper. You can owe it to me. You hit boardwalk, you owe me $2,000. And we'd keep playing and playing and playing. Okay, you now owe me $14,360. And just make us keep going deeper and deeper in debt while he enjoyed it and smiled. And then when it was all done, okay, I win, you guys lose. Loser punishment. He'd flip the board, and you got to clean it all up. And he turned out to be a great uncle later in life. It's people living by these anti-Christian values that we as Christians abhor. And we don't like, and we don't accept, we don't respect. And then people use those same values to get to the top of their world, and then we let them influence us. And we listen to what they say, and we follow after them, and we do what they think we ought to do, and so on and so forth, etc. The list could be longer, but I'm not going to spend time making it longer this morning. We're going to continue now with Exodus 24a. The first part of Exodus 23, we're still in chapter 23, but verse 24a. Do not bow down to their gods or worship them or follow their practices. And so that's the part I want to focus on. And the context here is concerning those who are not God's people. You're moving into the land of Canaan. There's going to be Canaanites living around you. Concerning them, do not bow down before their gods or worship them or follow their practices. So don't Be like the Canaanites. Don't worship their gods and don't follow their practices. Again, in our context, as Christian believers, we can apply that to non-believers. Do not bow down to their gods or worship them or follow their practices. So who are the gods of the non-believers? Well, it's false gods and idols. That's who they were worshiping. This picture is a picture of the ancient god Baal, which shows up repeatedly in the Old Testament. And Baal happened to be one of the Israelites' biggest problem gods. He's one of the ones that they more than once would kind of return to and bring Baal worship into their culture. Part of the problem was the Israelites had been slaves in Egypt for years and years. They made bricks and that kind of stuff, built pyramids. Then they go through war, into the promised land. They're migrants for a while, and then they start conquering the Canaanites, and they have great success as warriors. They finally win, they settle in the land, and now it's time to farm. And they know nothing about farming. They're not good at it, they don't have experience at it, they don't have generations. Their grandfather didn't pass down to them all of his farming knowledge because he had no farming knowledge. And so they didn't do very well. They messed some things up and their crops weren't that good. And the Canaanites around them, you know what they said? They said, you know what? You guys have a great warrior God. When you came in here as warriors and took on these countries around you and stuff, he was the guy. He really helped you win those wars. And we respect that. You've got the great warrior God. But Baal is responsible for the harvest. He's the god of fertility. And, he brings the rain, the thunderstorms. That's the God you need now that you're settling in here to become farmers. And they bought that. And so they would say, on the Sabbath, we're going to worship God, and then we're also going to put up a statue of Baal and worship him too, and so that we can have God, the protector, warrior God, and we can also have Baal, the fertility God, giving us good crops. And they repeatedly did that. They get in trouble for it. And one of those great stories, the story of Elijah taking on the prophets of Baal up on Mount Carmel, when God sends down the fire on the sacrifice. That's Baal, that was all about. So Baal and the 90 feet tall statue of Nebuchadnezzar that we showed earlier, those aren't the only kind of idols. That's one kind, those very concrete, literal idols, false gods. But idols can also be abstract or figurative. For example, Paul says in the New Testament that greed is idolatry. And so when we think about idolatry, are we thinking about idol worship? It's not just statues. Paul says that when someone is greedy, they are idolatrous. The things they're greedy for, materialism, the money, that's their God. False God, but God. That's what they're really worshiping compared to the real God. I want to look at some of those gods of non-believers. Security. I've known people, I've read about people, I observe people that are so interested in their personal security that they put above everything else, including God. I can't do this or that for the church, or I can't go to church because I got to be doing this to secure my future and have security and that sort of thing. Obviously, money. When Paul said that greed is idolatry, that is because you're putting money and other material things above God. You're more interested in spending time acquiring things than you are in sharing things and sacrificing things and giving time to God when you could be giving time to money making. Resume building. This is a newer one that has arisen in our culture, where parents get the idea that one of their chief goals in life is to build their children's resumes. And it starts very young. They want to get the kids into the best college, and you do that by building your kid's resume. And so pretty soon, You have some church youth event, a teen camp, or a teen retreat, or a special teen service, and the parents of the teens, not just the teens, parents of the teens, Johnny and Joey can't come to that because they've got this club at school, they've got this event they've got to do, or they've got this sport they've got to play in, and it's really all about because we want to put that on, that they were in this club for 3 years and that they played this sport for 4 years, and when they apply for these colleges, we want that resume to be full. And we want it to be full of social and civic stuff, not church stuff. We really don't care so much about the church stuff. And so that becomes a problem. Politicians. Again, the idea is like, in what way do we worship a politician? In what way do we make a politician an idol? Well, here's the big way. God says this is the principle, this is the value. The politician says, we're going to do this. This is the value that we need to work for. And if the two aren't the same, and you follow the politician, you've made him an idol. When you follow that guy who is promoting something that is non-Christian, even anti-Christian, then you've made that politician an idol. Because you're putting him before God. And I've heard friends on the internet have said to me, if my pastor did this or that, I would leave the church. And it would be a political thing. And what that says to me is, you have prioritized that policy or that activity or statement over the church. The family that you joined and became a part of, that God called you to, but you said that political view is more important than that. I'm going to put my political views above my church. So that's how politicians become idols. Personal power, that I just want to get to the top and be a person of influence and strive toward that. And so I'm going to do everything it takes. I had a guy come to me one time, and he was missing church a lot. His wife was coming along, and she complained to me about it. Would you talk to Steve? And this, that, and the other. And so I made an appointment with Steve, and we talked. And he said, Pastor, last month I was Airman of the Month on the base. And that's my goal. He says, at Air Force, you don't have to polish your shoes every day, but I polish my shoes every day. And I said, well, you really got to think this through, Steve. You've got a family, you've got the church, you've got your commitment to God. You need to decide what you're going to do about priorities in your life. Yeah, I know. Thanks for talking to me. Got with him about 2 weeks later. He said, I want to thank you for having that talk with me. It really made me think about my priorities and values. And so I just need to tell you, I won't be at church anymore. I decided that my Air Force career is the most important thing in my life. And if I take time out of that to do church stuff, I'm not going to get to where I want to go in the Air Force. That's that personal power thing. It became his God. His career became his God. And then freedom and liberty. We love our freedom, and we love our liberty. And those are values, especially in the United States, that we really, really value. We put that number one. The problem is when we put that so high that it also overtakes our devotion to God or our commitment to God. When it begins to dilute our commitment to God. There's that slogan for God and country. I understand that, and that's not a bad slogan. But I think in a lot of people's minds, after a few years, it becomes for country and God. They're more interested about our freedom than they are about God. Jesus lived in a time when his nation was occupied by foreigners. He was in occupied territory. The Israelites spent 400 years as slaves in Egypt. And they managed to serve God and follow him without having the liberty that we have. And there are pockets of places all over the world where there are strong Christians in the Christian church, in places where it's even underground, that is just exploding in membership and everything, where they don't have the freedom to do that. They don't have the liberty. So, let's appreciate our liberty and our freedom, but let's not ever let it come above our relationship with God. So what are the practices of these non-believers? It's like don't follow their gods or their practices, is what it says. Self-centeredness, greed, prideful ambition, lying, exploitative. Recognize that list? Yeah, it's kind of the same list we talked about earlier, that influencers, how they became influencers. The bottom line is that when the crowds become, when the multitudes of people follow those influencers, that's how they begin to behave. So, there are people, that might sit at the table next to you in the next restaurant you go to. They're not a leader, they're not an influencer, but they still live their lives being self-centered and greedy and lying and exploiting when necessary, because that's how they've learned to behave, by following those influencers. So that's the way the non-believers live. That's the values they live by. It's okay to lie if it gets me a little bit further ahead. And so we can't follow that behavior. So this is my closing. Christian believers don't follow the crowd in doing wrong, and don't follow non-believers' practices or their idols. Christian believers just don't do that. That's kind of a statement of fact, or at least it should be. Unfortunately, there are even believers who for a while can get sucked into that, and when they realize it, they need to repent and get back away from it. And so I want to talk about the power of a comma. Y'all know what a comma is? I'm going to put a comma back in that sentence after the word Christian believers. There it is. Now when I read it, you read it differently. Christian believers, pause, comma. Don't follow the crowd in doing wrong, and don't follow non-believers or practices or their idols. And so it was, without the comma, a declarative statement. With the comma, it becomes an imperative or an order. And so whichever is most applicable to you today, take that home. Let's pray. Next Saturday, or this Saturday, today, and so Kim has a team. Robin's joining. To my knowledge, that's the only two that are planning to walk that day. So if you're not going to walk, it's not too late, but if you're not going to, you can choose to sponsor one of them. Today would be the most convenient day to talk to them, because they're both here. So see them if you want to sign up to sponsor one of them for the Walk for Life this coming Saturday. Our semi-annual, I always struggle with, do I call this biannual, semi-annual? Because it's twice a year, not once every 2 years. And some of those words can be used interchangeably. You have biannual plants, they come out every 2 years. Anyways, we do it twice a year, and we're going to do it next Sunday, and then for those who forget or something, we'll do it the Sunday after. So I've got the box out as a reminder. Hopefully you noticed that earlier and thought, why is that sitting there? It's because next week and the next week we'll be receiving your alabaster offerings into that. This coming Thursday is the third Thursday of the month, right? And so we will have our praise and prayer gathering here at the church at 7 o'clock. And again, the intent is anybody in the church family that can should come and join us as we pray for the needs of the church. It's a pretty small group that could be bigger. So if you're available, please join us as we pray for the church first and third Thursdays of the month. Our tithes and offering we're collecting in our offering box at the back. So if you haven't already done so, please do that before you leave today. You are dismissed to go out and follow him, not the crowd.